So let me first introduce myself. My name is Luka. I'm going to be host of today's panel. And I'm going to invite my guests to join me here on the stage. So warm welcome for Julien Coustaury of Rouge Capital and Ed Rivera of DigitalWorks. Please take your seat. Here's your mic. So, hi and welcome to both of you. Thank you for being part of this. And I know with your experience, we're going to have a really interesting show. And I know that some of the audience also has similar problems of scaling. So hopefully they're going to participate at a certain point. So the theme is challenges of building a global company in today's world. So let's just jump in directly. So let's start.
Let's do it.
Let's start from you, Julien. So you have a great deal of experience in many, many ventures. So different kinds of things. We just had a conversation back in the backstage. So you built companies, you participated in an execution team, but also in the past couple of years, you have been evaluating startups in the thousands. So building a global tech company is really, really hard. From this perspective, I haven't heard any single company, any single startup saying, it was easy, let's do it again. So, what would you say? What is the single most and biggest mistake you can do entering a new market, especially if you want to scale fast?
Okay, well, I think that if we had the recipe, we would apply it and all be very successful and making a lot of money. Well, I mean, there are many things that should be done if you want to scale, of course. I think probably the biggest mistake I see from companies that want to scale is that they're actually not present in the country they want to roll out their product. I think it's a misconception to think that with a little bit of Facebook advertising and Google advertising, you can actually penetrate a market. Unfortunately, it takes much more than that. And I would say that this is, a simple one, but a one that a lot of companies failed to execute on is actually be present on the country where you want to scale.
Ed, you had experience of, diverse. Julien mostly spent his time in this part of the world. I mean, East and Asia. You're coming from US. Actually, one of the companies that you executed was in Canada. And
Correct.
then, can you expand a little bit on this because?
Yes, no, happy to do so. So let's say I'll put it in the context as situational. In the case of a company that I was part of, TouchTunes, it was founded by engineers in Montreal. And they had scaled the company to about 300 employees. They built it up to about $100 million in sales, but then they had stalled. Their main market was in the United States. And we were brought in by the board to reignite growth and position the company to exit. It was about scaling globally. One of the key things we did, and I think this is in that context, you do have to have the management team and the systems in place in preparation for growth. And they had not reinvested in themselves to do that. So we created a headquarters in New York, to your point, Julien, right? Getting into the country, knowing the country. And we scaled up and we basically recalibrated the entire talent team. We stayed at 300 employees, but we shifted 90 of the headcount into the US. And then that allowed us to 2 to 3x in growth, and then use New York as our launch pad for other markets abroad.
Perfect. This brings me to my next question. So, scaling a company means scaling the team, especially a local team, someone who knows the customs and stuff like this. But again, coming to a new market from Canada to New York, that's two different universes. And we had this conversation earlier. How do you scale a talent team, and how do you pick that when you don't have anyone, physically present? You're usually the first one. So how does that happen?
Well, I mean, I think everybody's got his own strategy to pick up a talent team. I have my own. I mean, I'm getting old enough now, and everybody talks about artificial intelligence, but in there you have actually patterns, behavior, and way to analyze things and people, which are getting better and better as your gray hair is growing. Actually, I mean, I have no hair, but the few ones that I have left are getting gray. But so I think that I have this strategy of hire fast, fire fast. There's not a, I mean, we tried quite a lot of things in New York when we tried to scale one of our company in New York, and no headhunter, no agent is actually in a position to bring you the perfect match. So once I understood that, I was just not bothering any longer. I would hire people, make some very quick Skype interviews, not even read the CV, because I would assume that if they had come to me, the CV was irrelevant, or at least half relevant, but rather focus on the spirit and the gut feel I could get from a Skype conversation with the person, eventually meeting in person, and calling a quick shot on hiring the person. It happened that especially I remember in the US, we hired a couple of salespeople, which lasted actually less than a few days, just because they were not a fit. So I'd say hire a lot of people and hire fast, fire fast. That's my only way to do it.
I mean, that's an interesting point. Just to follow up, so you think machines will never replace humans when it comes to talent? Is that true or false?
I mean, I don't know. I think gut feeling is a fantastic way to call the shots and make decisions. Still.
Super. Ed, the same question to you, because I know that you scaled the team first from Canada to US and then to the rest of the parts of the world. I mean,
well, I agree and concur with everything Julien said. I'd take it to so I'll just expand on that, but I'll make one quick comment first in the context of hyper growth. When you look at Uber, right, as an example, that's fascinating, right? Because they hadn't even built out in the U.S. and conquered the United States, but they strategically made a decision. They're going global fast, and they were in 17 countries in 17 cities around the world. When you do that, the only way that works is a lot of money, because you're going to be making mistakes all day long. You're hiring fast and firing fast, but you have to have the deep pockets. For the rest of us, I like it when you're taking sort of like managing your rate of investment and risk behind it. Another way beyond taking advantage of strategic partnerships. So in my case, as head of product, I managed my innovation company, a company called Frog Design, and they were global. Actually, we weren't global, but they were. So when I'd go into markets, when I'd study China, or I'd study the UK, or I'd go to South Korea, I would ask them to have their teams in those local offices brief myself and the CEO about the country, how to do business there. They knew our product, they knew our strategy, they knew us as a company. And then they would extend their networks of talent and make introductions to find quality people and leaders in those markets.
Perfect. I mean, that's a great example of different kinds of approaches in terms of scaling. You mentioned one really interesting thing. Your company was producing hardware and software, both. And hardware is a high cost, let's say, structure. And some would say that it's so much easier to scale a software startup because you have Facebook and you have all the other things. And the only thing you care is cost of acquisition. What's it like what are the things that you need to do in order to scale a hardware startup globally? I think that's maybe...
Right, so to give you, TouchTunes was the manufacturer of digital music jukeboxes. So it's an IoT device and a platform for commerce and a B2B business. So now knowing that, anytime you have to go into a market where there's a device, all it does is it expands the requirements of the work that a product leader has to do to make sure that the consumer experience and the product offering and everything around that, the pricing, the market fit, sizing, adaptability, customer support, you have to manage a lot more, right? And there's a lot more risk associated with that. So the cost of going in, the cost of engagement may be the same, but the cost of actually providing that support and doing things right, which I like to say, is a lot more. And so is the risk associated. And be ready for that. I think people underestimate how much effort that takes.
So back to you, Julien. Imagine, not imagine, I guess you were in this situation. You're an executive opening up a new company and you start hiring a team. What is again, I'm not looking for a cookbook, but your experience. What is the single most important thing you can give your team scaling there? Is it, I don't know, your undivided attention? Is it absolute trust in their abilities? Is it massive amounts of money? You know, what is something that can basically make or break a team there?
I mean, money is always good when you have it. And that being said, it's very often a short-term vision to assist and bring a good team together. Attention is wishful thinking because you, in a startup mode, you never have the luxury of giving your team the attention they need. So I think I would go back to the hiring process. You know, you have to hire the right people at the right place. I mean, I'm a big football fan, and I'm always thinking about the great football teams that are at the moment on the European scene, and they are all there just because they are an aggregation of 11 super talented individuals, and that's what eventually makes a great or the greatest team. And business is no different. I mean, I think, you know, whether you want to scale fast, you want to conquer a new market, you want to do whatever you want. I think, obviously, it has been said and repeated, but the team is eventually what's going to make the difference. And I would go back to the strategy of, I mean, when I was in telecom, we used to roll out new markets in very diverse countries, from Ivory Coast to Bolivia, passing by in Haiti. The strategy we had was to actually keep the same team and initiate the work in all those new companies and countries with the same team. And that really helped the scaling. So once you have a team that knows how to do it, once you've spent time training the team and bringing them to your standards, I think a good way to scale is actually to reuse this team wherever you go, even if they only stay a limited amount of time in a new country and a new place to be scaled, so that they can actually really train on the job the team that is going to stay there forever and permanently.
Yeah, I'd say the kind of a consideration also to take. How do you approach financing your global expansion, right? Because that's sort of also that dictates not just the strategy, but tactically how you approach it. So, for example, if you're going to go into a market where you're funding it out of your own cash flows, or do you have to raise money to do that, right? So we talked about in a startup context, it doesn't matter whether you're a startup or your existing companies, you got the cash flows, and how much risk you want to take with those cash flows, and that's one option. The second option would be to buy a company in that local market, and then using those cash flows or reducing your risk, or to build out your business, which in the case of TouchTunes, that's what we did. We were confronted, if we had raised $40 million for growth capital from 3i, which many of you might be familiar with, the global private equity firm, and we, in our analysis of opportunities around the world, if we would have gone into China, we would have had to probably have raised $100 million, right, just to get into that market. We decided not to do that because we didn't want to take on that kind of risk. Instead, we prioritized entering the UK market, where I identified a company that ultimately we successfully acquired, and I was generating it was at that point it was £10 million in free cash flow, and then we used our launching pad in London for the UK. So that's just there we had a team, right, already committed, and now it's just and partners and a base really to sort of launch from.
Super. I mean, there's a lot of. I want to touch one. I don't know, maybe it's not a sensitive topic. It's controversial. There's a lot of. How many startups do we have here from Europe? Raise your hand. Okay, a lot. So I would say that almost a universal opinion of startups from Europe would be it's so much easier to scale from US to anywhere else in the world than from, let's say, Slovenia or Croatia or somewhere else. So is that really true? So once you conquer US market or Canada, is it easy to scale wherever, I don't know, China or globally, regardless of the cash? What would you think so? Both of you. I mean, we've seen Slovenian startups trying to scale in Germany, in US and stuff like this. It's like, I'm trying to figure out an angle here that makes, kind of a universal answer. Yeah.
For me, scaling is difficult, period. And I think, I was fortunate to invest in American companies trying to conquer Europe, and vice versa. And frankly speaking, it's probably as difficult for a European guy to go to New York as it is for a New Yorker to land in Ljubljana. In that respect, I think it just comes down to scaling, which is a very difficult exercise, period. That's what I think.
I'm glad you said it. I mean, that's one of the things. I share the same opinion, but it's hard to convince startups from a 2 million people country or 4 million people country of the same thing.
Ed was mentioning the money. It's a fact that American startups are richer than generally European startups. So back to Ed's point is, you have to look at the money you have in your books before you try to scale and go somewhere else. This is maybe why the conception that it might be easier for a US company to conquer Europe kind of emerged, but it's only a factor of the money you have to throw at a new country, nothing from a cultural, marketing and commercial standpoint.
Yeah, I agree with that. Look, two quick. The Asian tiger is out, right? So this is no longer a U.S. game. Just be clear. And anyone can build. I'll tell you a quick little story because I was you're interviewing when you're going into countries, so you meet successful entrepreneurs. So I'm in Shanghai. I meet this gentleman called Mickey Feng, and he's the CEO and founder of Touch Media. And at that time, he was the poster child for technology entrepreneurship in Shanghai. I'm talking to this guy, perfect English, and I'm like, Mickey, where are you from? He says, I'm from New York. I'm like, what are you doing in Shanghai? He says, doesn't speak a word of Mandarin. His first generation, his parents moved from China to New York. The short story is, what he wanted to do, what he was inspired to do as a founder, as an entrepreneur, was to have media in every cab in the United States, right? And sell advertising and own that screen behind in a cab. It was so highly regulated, he couldn't convince anyone to give him permission to do it. So he was inspired to go to Shanghai, and that was his journey. And he was, at the time, in 75,000 cabs, and a great success. He's since sold the company, he's now moved back to New York. But I was very much inspired by him and his story.
Perfect. I mean, this brings me to my last question. One of the things that are really important when trying to help a company scale somewhere else is the market conditions, customs, but also cultural things. You mentioned Shanghai, China, a huge country, amazing market. but I haven't heard a single US company, conquering that market easily, or even Japan, or stuff like this. So how important are, the customs and the market conditions for scaling something like this? I mean, New York versus Boston, Canada versus US, that's easy, or France and Belgium, or Croatia and Slovenia, but this is a fundamentally different culture and fundamentally different market conditions. Can you kind of expand a little bit on that?
Look, when you're evaluating the opportunity, a country, particularly like a country like China, the numbers are so overwhelming and positive, right? Everyone wants to get a piece of the action there. I think you have to assess your ability to actually be successful in that country, right? And then what's required to be successful. One of the things that I learned that as a country like China is that you can easily miscalculate the level of investment. And what I mean by that is, let's say if you're in the United States, if you were growing 20% year over year, that's a pretty healthy number, right? For most, you'll take that all day long. And American companies that first entered into China were getting those numbers, 20, 40%. However, 3-5 years later, they failed in the marketplace and got wiped out. The reason for that is they had underinvested in the market because their competitors were growing 50 to 100%, sometimes 200% year over year. And then long term, right, you lost your position in the marketplace, even if you were the leader when you got started. So that's what I mean by you have to be very thoughtful about, okay, what is it really, the whole equation, and planning for success and making sure you're clear on that.
Well, in one of my past venture that I co-founded, actually, I was lucky enough to raise a lot of money in Japan. Don't really ask me why, but it was money and we took it. And obviously, when you have a local partner, a local investor, which was also a strategic investor, that did all the commercial job for us in Japan, made it a lot easier. Obviously, it's back to what we said earlier on in the conversation is, you have to bring a local content wherever you go, whether you like it or not. That's probably, if not the only way to succeed, certainly the best way to succeed.
Thank you very much.